um, hey, so how's it going? My name is Ellie Sandhouse. I am a storyteller at Studio 3. Why don't you guys quickly introduce yourself, say your name and your job description?
I'm Phyllis Levitt, and I'm a psychotherapist and an author.
Awesome.
I'm Noah Healy. I'm a professional developer and market designer.
Sweet. Welcome, Phyllis and Noah. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So we like to start off these conversations with a kind of a out of the box sort of question. So I want to know. Let's start with you, Phyllis. Could you describe to us what was your childhood home like?
Well, I thought about it since you told us before that that was the question. Yeah, my parents were both went through the Depression, so our home was kind of bare. It sort of like had the essentials, and it didn't have much personal expression in it. Like I was thinking back to how I was with my kids. Our pictures weren't on the wall, our photographs weren't, our art wasn't. It was just very bare and very simple, and almost a little bit, I would say, unfeminine, kind of just very masculine kind of.
Interesting. Utilitarian.
Yeah, totally.
All right, fascinating. And I'm just curious, do you see that as having, played into your work today?
Very much. Yeah. I mean, my memories of my home are kind of like that too, just kind of there. And I think particularly what I was reflecting on was like there were no pictures of us. There was or like I said, like our art. So there was no reflection back.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And I
I mean,
think
like, I
that,
don't mean to
yeah,
just to like think about that. Quite literally, there's no self-reflection.
right. And so I became a psychotherapist. I mean, that's all about reflection, self
Right.
reflection, helping other people reflect on themselves. So, yeah, very interesting association you made there.
Fascinating. All right, and Noah, yourself?
Well, again, I had a little time to think about this. My parents divorced and remarried, and as a consequence of that,
Mm.
and each of them had half siblings further on. So I'm actually the oldest of six children, but
Mm.
not in one group. And my brother and I were sort of stuck together, and we went back and forth multiple times per week. For a big chunk of our childhood, our parents actually lived on the same street, although several houses away from
Mm.
each other. But even after that stopped being the case, the the tradition of changing homes every 2 to max 4 days, but that would only happen once every like 2 weeks, um, continued. So
Wow.
I basically changed addresses once every 72-ish hours for the overwhelming
Wow.
majority of my childhood.
Wow. That is that I'm sure that so how would you say that has contributed to who you are today?
Um, I really, can't say. I've sort of been asked this question many times over the decades, and
Mm.
I have a sample of one. So, growing up, I thought of my life as ordinary because it was my life. Um,
Mm.
uh, it's certainly possible that that level of stimulation helps. There's a lot of present research on offering developing minds a lot of stimulation to help them have a lot of variation. And uh, I did not grow up in a or even two well-to-do families, and I would likely have been in more more static circumstances if that had not occurred, and that might have something to do with it. Uh, it really changes a lot of things about the sort of parent child dynamic. I've pointed out on multiple occasions that we were effectively unpunishable, because you ground a child and then they leave
They
the
leave.
house for 3 days, and
Yeah.
then they come back and it's like so it's over. Uh, at one point, I had more experience with children than my parents did, because I had two other siblings that neither of them had. So I was
Oh
sort
wow.
of I was sort of hanging around with 5 kids at a time, and they were only hanging around with 4 kids at a time, and so I was sort of catching up to them. It was very weird things like that happened in my upbringing.
Interesting. And do you see that having influenced your decision to go into mathematics?
Not so far as I can tell. I I started reading before I went to kindergarten. I have
Oh wow.
clear memories of reading to myself at that time. I
Hmm.
was a loner basically forever. Um, the street that we sort of moved to when I was born um, had a creek with a bamboo forest behind our house and a pine forest across the road, dirt track a
Did
few
you grow up
blocks
on my
in.
street? Because that sounds an awful lot like the street that I grew up on.
It was sort of like one of these idyllic boys' life types of neighborhoods where I was, which was, it's fantastic as a boy to grow up in those
Right.
environments. Um, so I always spent lots of time each day outside the house, wandering around in the woods or the brambles. As far as math goes, I I sort of found out that I was exceptionally good at math in school. Like, I'm sure I could count. Actually, I'm absolutely positive that I can count because I can actually recall the first counting exercise that they gave us in kindergarten. Um, that they had these mimeographed worksheets with like stars and circles and stuff that you had to count up. And I was the first person in the class to finish counting my worksheet, and I brought it up to the teacher. And I noticed that she counted, they were rectangular arrays, and she would count across and then down the arrays to say,
Uh,
okay, this is
so
12,
a
this is
multiplication
15.
table.
And yeah, and so I kind of sat myself down and worked out multiplication at that point. Uh,
Wow.
and
Fascinating.
it actually
Mm.
transpired. I didn't find this out until much later, but my dad kind of accidentally taught me algebra in first grade in the first few weeks, like
Whoa.
showing up with homework.
We got a lot going on.
Uh, and so I kind of just drifted through elementary school mathematics as sort of a relatively boring thing. And fortunately, there were some enrichment programs, so I got exposed to set theory uh, and a lot of other things that aren't part of the ordinary educational scheme. Which again, just sort of happened to me. Like I had a lot of bizarre educational opportunities in my life that have sort of popped up in weird places decades later. And people ask me about them, and like I didn't do any of that stuff. So like the logo for my company is written in a programming language called Logo, which they taught us when I was 8. And so I know it now.
Wow. So
Mm.
you have like superb retention.
Um, if something makes sense, I will effectively remember it forever. If something is arbitrary, I effectively can't remember it at all. So I'm
Mm.
that your names are on the bottom there because people's names, people might as well introduce themselves to me as blah because it vanishes
Mm.
like water on hot brick. Like it's gone instantaneously.
All right, fascinating. So we have here, two very vastly different people who both excelled in their own fields, and it's just fascinating that we're going to be able to, explore different topics in Technicolor. So I say let's just jump right in. And Phyllis, why don't you lead us off and tell us a little bit? So the structure, just to recap, is going to be the past, future, and then present of each of your respective fields.
Okay.
So Phyllis, if you could just give us some sort of factual thing and anything about psychology that you can think of that occurred between the Big Bang and a moment ago that is definitive. Anything off the top of your
About
head.
psychology or my relationship to psychology? I'm just
So I guess either one. Because as you'll see, the next segments will be progressively more and more personalized. So
okay. Well, yeah, I probably won't give you the history of psychology because I actually don't know it.
okay,
Right.
that's
I
all
mean,
right.
I think it's a fairly recent, study with the depth that is being studied now in terms
Right.
of understanding human behavior. Um, and I would just say from my own past that at a certain point in my life, I just was such a mystery to myself. I had no idea why I had gotten into a marriage that was, not comfortable for me, and felt like there was a lot that wanted to be expressed that didn't come out. Like there was just sort of a lid on who I was and my self-expression. And just a lot of, I would just say, to be honest, really difficult feelings that I was dealing with particularly as a young mother. I had 3 kids, and I ended up going to therapy. That's pretty much what happened. And at that time, I think that was in the 80s. And, up until that point, nobody really in my venue or my circle talked about therapy, but all of a sudden it kind of came on the scene, and people that I knew were going to therapy. And so I went, and it was like all of a sudden, it was really, what was a light bulb for me, we kind of take for granted, I think, today. And that is that, our childhood and our upbringing and our conditioning and our role models have everything to do with how we feel about ourselves and the coping mechanisms we learn, the expectations we have of ourselves and other people, how we deal with conflict, all those things. And for me, that was really just an awakening. Oh, my childhood actually had something to do with this, and I'm not just an anomaly, And that was the eye opener. And I think that's what it's been I think that's what the world of psychology has offered, to some great extent, that there is cause and effect. It's not, 100% the same for every people by any means, but there are patterns of what influences our development in certain ways, whether we become people who are, fulfilled and peaceful and relatively loving or cooperative in our relationships, or whether we become violent and rageful or antisocial or hermits, or, it's not a total mystery. So I think that's probably the big contribution that it was for me personally and in our society. Go ahead.
So just to because I'm an Orthodox Jew, so I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts on free will? Because it would seem from your description to be very deterministic.
Yeah, I don't think it's deterministic. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of factors. I have lots of different angles about free will, basically, and that some of them don't have anything to do with psychology at all, or religion, or I've followed different spiritual paths at times, and I was also born Jewish, not an Orthodox Jew, but a Reformed Jew. But so I just have a lot of thoughts about it that I'll just, if I could try to condense them. I'm not an arguer for or against free will. I think we operate, though, to some extent based on how unconscious we are of whatever our driving impulses are. And to that extent, we're not really free. I think we're very reactive. And again, this is all relative. This is, and I think some people are born, when I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I don't know where that came from. So, I think that there's psychological factors that determine some of the ways that we be. I think we're also born with our own individual nature, that, you could have several kids in the same family, but they don't turn out the same at all, even though they have relatively the same conditioning.
I was actually, oh, sorry, no, continue.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was just reading a study about identical twins that were separated at birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's fascinating. Like they've determined, now Noah, this is your department, but they've determined, according to this study that was done in Sweden and replicated in the United States, that 70% of intelligence, or one's IQ really, can be determined my bad. 70% genetically, 30% through nurture.
Yeah, but there are some outlier incidences that can have
Right.
especial
outliers.
effects. Well, there's an anecdotal story that's actually quite sad of a pair of Korean girls that were separated at birth. One adopted by American parents and one of which stayed in Korea. And the one adopted by American parents actually had a catastrophic brain injury, just fluke accident basically, during her childhood. And so she's something like 2 standard deviations lower IQ than her identical twin sister is.
Right, but that can clearly be attributed
Right.
to
Yes, but outside of such gross interventions, there's a lot of linkage, and I have a situation. I've got my brother. We have the same parents. Then I have 2 sisters who have the same parents, and another pair of brothers that my mom had, and you can kind of see similarities and differences between the pairs. Um, I share a parent with all of them, but even so, uh, my brother and I, we were 2 years apart, and people used to think that we were twins. That as people 2 years apart, we were dramatically different sized individuals, and we came up with, I think it was 19. A catalog of the 19 things just in our faces that were completely different. Like, for example, we have different eye color, um, but the mannerisms that you adopt and the tone of voice and speaking and so on that you acquire would be enough. And in particular, since the 2 of us spent more time with each other than we spent with anybody else, including our parents, because of the aforementioned back and forth thing, we could finish each other's sentences and had absolutely no compunction about doing so in social situations. And so people would like leap to that like psychic twin or whatever thing, and we're like, what are you, insane? Like, I'm a head taller than he is. We have different hair color, different eye color. Like, it's what's going on?
Fascinating. Yeah, I was reading that so this was more so in regards to twins, but I mean I assume the same would apply, that like they asked twins separated at birth to pose for a picture, and they found that identical twins would pose in the same manner while fraternal twins would not.
There's a lot of stuff on genetic similarities. Even married couples. I read this bizarre thing. They found correlation in spleen size between married couples, and there's an entire theory in evolutionary genetics. The selfish gene, if you've ever heard of that concept.
No. Please. What
So
is that?
evolution operates on individual genes, essentially, not on organisms. And so each gene
Okay.
is attempting to propagate itself, and genes, not being consciously aware beings, don't know about the rest of the genetic legacy that they're part of. So, I'm a human being. I've got like 300 billion base pairs that are expressing tens of thousands of proteins and all sorts of other distributions, but at least half of those are in each of my siblings. And so if I have 0 offspring and my siblings have 100 offspring, then it's for that the genes that go on, it's the same as if I had 100 kids. And for the genes that don't go on, it's the same as if, it doesn't make any difference. So you get these kinds of situations where the genetic similarity of two parental creatures in the sexual species means that basically your partner is bringing more of you to the table and increasing the amount of you that's in your children. And so from a selfish gene perspective, the more similar you are to your partner, genetically speaking, the more of you, copies of your genes are being produced when you're reproducing. Um, Now, the flip side of that is that there's inbreeding depression. If you've got some errors that are then getting repropagated and so on. But yeah, people have a tendency to be attracted towards sort of this similarity at the genetic level, and it's not just people. This is observable in dogs, cats, lions, snakes, and other sexual species as well, because it's the same principle at work in all of them.
Fascinating. Wow. All right, so shifting gears just a little bit. Noah, why don't you quickly tell us something factual, something in the past about mathematics or game theory or anything that you're working on? Something that happened
Um,
between the Big Bang and a moment ago.
sure. Well, how about this? The invention of computers was rooted in the grief of a father. There's a guy, and I may butcher this name, Diophanes, and he, in about 300 AD, his son died, and he decided to maintain his sanity by studying the properties of integral equations. That would be basically the kind of math that we teach elementary school kids, problems that have integer inputs and integer outputs. And
Okay.
these have the trait that they might not have a solution. Um,
Can you give an example?
yeah, sure. 7x equals 5.
Okay.
No solutions.
Right.
And he wasn't the first person to look into these, but he wrote a book basically about his studies. He developed a few new techniques, and over the preceding 1500-ish years, people were getting a lot better at it by the 1800s. And so this guy named David Hilbert was putting together what he sort of saw as the plan for 20th century mathematics. And the 10th question on his plan was called mechanizing Diophantine equations. In sort of the parlance of the term, that would be finding a complete set of algorithms that would allow you to automatically solve all such problems.
Wow.
And it was the attempt to solve that problem that Alan Turing was working on.
Mm.
And when he invented his approach, He invented the computer not as a actual practical object to help him solve math problems. He invented the computer as a conceptual object to create a way to fully describe all imaginable things. And he then demonstrated that that object could not solve all Diophantine equations. And so it was impossible to even imagine a complete mechanization, because a machine that could encompass all possible imagination couldn't do it.
Fascinating. Wow. I personally love this sort of subject matter because like I'm very into philosophy. So I love the philosophy behind the math. I'm not such a math person, but the concept of a mechanization of all, yeah, wow. So
Yeah, I think that computational mathematics is probably better thought of, rather than as sort of computer programming, as the actual mathematics of philosophy.
interesting. Fascinating. Wow. All right. So thank you so much, Noah. Now, Phyllis, let's discuss, where do you see the future of psychology and or sexual abuse, um, you know, management, or well, however, where do you see the future, or anything theoretical, anything that's not yet concrete? You know, do you have a book that you're working on? Do you, I know that you had mentioned that, or anything that's yet to have been put down in history books?
Well, I think, I'm writing a book right now that I've titled America in Therapy, and the subtitle is Hope and Healing for a Fractured Nation. So my goal and and I've written the book and it's in the process of being edited, but the thrust of the book is that we're really in danger as a species. And I'm focusing on America because I live in America and that's the country that I'm familiar with, but really most of what I'm saying applies to the human race. And that is that I feel that we're really in danger of either our own extinction or, extinguishing a lot of us and a lot of life forms if we don't improve and really reverse courses in the way that we treat one another. Because, and this is the basic theory of my book, and it comes out of years of work with sexual abuse and other abuse, emotional abuse, physical violence, discrimination, all those kinds of abuse that we heap on one another, whether it's in our families or societally. And that's really my point, is that what we see happening in abusive families and the effects that abuse has on people, and there's many different effects. And again, there's no one size fits all for any of it. And when I say there's patterns, I'm saying there's sort of knowable kinds of ways to look at what injury is and what possible solutions or healing might look like. And that, given that it's very individual for different people and different families, but that what happens in abusive families is happening in our country and is happening in the world, and that large institutions and governments operate on many of the same principles that abusers do, whether it's blaming the people that they hurt for the abuse that they heap on them, then blaming them for the symptoms that they have. So if you target a group of people and you keep incarcerating them and they don't get an education and they have no possibility when they come out, and then they go back to a life of that's not constructive or socially helpful, and then we blame them for that. So abusers blame their victims for the abuse, they blame them for their symptoms, they silence truth tellers, and we have masses of, a massive thrust of that going on in our own country right now. People are being tear gassed who are peaceful demonstrators. Journalists are being targeted and, defamed and assaulted, and, it goes on and on. But basically, that being said, that we know so much in the field of psychology about how to heal abuse, how to stop the cycle, how to help people who have been victimized. Because one of the things that I'm writing about and that I've seen over and over again, and I think some of this is common knowledge, is that inside most perpetrators is a victim. So somewhere we have to stop the cycle of abuse. And because the two most common outcomes of abuse that isn't stopped or isn't treated is either learned helplessness, people become passive, they don't resist because they've learned that they can't, or they identify with the aggressor. And so we keep producing more aggressors and more people who will submit. And that spells disaster for a democracy. It spells disaster for how we treat the planet and our children. I hope you can see the mushroom effect of what I'm talking about. And so
Yeah.
I feel like, for me, the no duh that I wanted to write about, because I don't think it's mainstream conversation at all, or even mainstream understanding, is that our human relations are actually what put us at risk. If we were treating each other the way we all wanted to be treated ourselves, if no one did to anybody else what they wouldn't have be done to them, we wouldn't have nuclear weapons, we wouldn't have war, we wouldn't have rape, we wouldn't have racial discrimination, we wouldn't be, destroying the earth, we wouldn't be doing those things. So it's sort of like the answers are in plain sight. And I know that there's other avenues of approach to healing, our human family, but I'm taking the psychological one because that's the one that I'm so familiar with.
All right, awesome. Just like a quick little, like maxim that like I like living by is whenever you point a finger at somebody else, you got 3 fingers pointing back at you.
Mm-hmm. And what's the meaning of that? What do you mean by 3?
That it doesn't necessarily have to be 3. I'm saying it's just the idea is that you have fingers pointing back at yourself, and that you can try and essentially victimize yourself, but you're just feeding into that cycle of
Yeah.
negativity.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that psychology, when it's good, when it's at its best, psychotherapy at its best, and this comes back to that word, the word we had in the beginning of self-reflection. I'm reflecting on me. What's my part in this play? Not what you did. I could change my step in this dance, and you'd probably have to change yours, or at least I could die trying,
Wow. All right, Noah, you're up. Tell us something in the realm of theoretical or hypothetical or just, in the pipeline.
Yeah, sure.
Or unless if you have anything you want to say about what Phyllis just spoke about.
Well, I guess I can actually kind of do both of those at the same time. So this is slightly of the past, but these aren't in sort of general circulation because I haven't gotten very many people to listen to me so far. But what launched me on my current project was the discovery of what I'm calling negotiation games, which is a set of potential strategic conditions um, wrapped around coordination situations. So, a coordination game is one in which deviation from the coordination point is personally harmful. And a simple practical example of this is, what side of the street do you drive on?
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were going in a totally different direction. Are you familiar with tit for tat?
I am familiar with tit for tat. Yes, that
Okay,
is
so
a strategy for coping with psychotic games like the prisoner's dilemma, and I
right.
can talk a little bit if you want about why our existing methods of jurisprudence actually drive uh, uh, effectively mob creation through that mechanism. But over on my topic,
Yes, you were saying about driving on the right side of the street.
So driving on the right side of the street is a coordination game. If you choose to drive not on the normal side of the street, you will bear a fairly strong consequence of that. Other people might also bear a fairly strong consequence of that. But you certainly won't have a very nice day. Coordination games are self-evidently incredibly important to societies, but they have a couple of problems. One is sort of a free rider scenario, where if you just sort of overcommit to all being in one basket, then sort of parasitism can come in, and people can not really be motivated to keep going with them. But another very critical one is something called the stagnation problem or stagnation game. And that is because individual deviation from the group agreement is personally harmful. Even when the group agreement isn't great or is in fact generally harmful, people still won't actually deviate from it. And it's possible to replicate this under laboratory conditions. And it's also something that has been detected in like practical economics. There are versions of the stagnation game which can be given to people, in which they will adhere around a more optimistic or more pessimistic norm. And it's been discovered that people coming from cultures of less developed countries adhere around more pessimistic norms, um, when you give them the test. There's other things that you can do, like with monkeys. You can put monkeys in a cage that basically has a trap in it. There's like a banana, but if any monkey touches the banana, the cage will like electrify, so they can't get it. And so you can train monkeys not to touch this banana that's in the center of the cage. You can then take one of those out, put in a monkey that's been in there, and it'll go for the banana, and the other monkeys will, get shocked and sort of learn to beat up new monkeys getting into the cage. And you can cycle this until every single monkey in the cage never got shocked, but they all just train and beat up monkeys that are being put in the cage. And at that point, you can turn the electricity off, because they'll been trained, and they will know that nobody's supposed to touch the banana. And if you bring in cultural norms slowly enough, they will acculturate the new monkeys to not touch the banana in spite of the fact that there's no problem. So at a
Even without
negotiation,
having experienced it, right? That's fascinating.
right. So what negotiation games do is effectively tackle both of these problems simultaneously by taking the structure of the game and extracting a computer program that can be open, and so everybody knows what it's doing and how it's doing it, to signal what the group uh, consensus presently is. And then people can effectively individually participate in the group consensus. So free riderism can be brought down, because people choosing not to participate in the group consensus are simply harming themselves by doing so. At the same time, the entire group can, in a coordinated fashion, be moved if the computer program can effectively be convinced to change things. And so by setting up a cost of change and a reward for change measurement, you can create a scenario whereby people who have ideas for how to do things better can introduce them to the group in a way that the entire group can execute in a coordinated fashion. Those people can take on the responsibility and costs of those ideas when they are in error, so that the group can sort of correct and not have to bear the price of kind of following the Pied Piper off a cliff. And those persons, when they're not wrong, can be rewarded for improving the group's outcomes.
Fascinating. Wow, that reminds me of a study I was reading about recently, that it was a very simple study. They had a room full of actors, and I think they had one real participant at a time, like amongst the actors, but they didn't know that everyone else was actors. And they drew two lines on a whiteboard, one clearly longer than the other. And they asked all the actors first, which line is longer? And every single one, they were told to point to the shorter one. And when the participant who was last got up to the board and was asked, okay, so which line is longer? They hesitated. And a lot of them even said that the clearly shorter one is the longer one.
Yeah,
Simply just
behavior under social pressure is extremely psychotic. Probably
Yeah.
the most sort of horrifying version of this is the Milgram experiment with actors, where the authority experiments, where he had
Oh, the shocking.
students appear to murder
Yeah.
people on order of somebody with a clipboard, and most people will.
It's
Mhm.
insane.
Mhm.
It's absolutely mind-boggling just how much society and our surroundings dictate who we are and what we do. And going back to the beginning of the conversation where we were discussing free will, I don't know. I'm still convinced on an individualistic level that we have as much free will as we believe we do. And that everything in a person's observable world could be pointing them towards option A, yet they still have the ability to choose option B.
Yeah, yeah. Well, powerful.
It's a core belief of mine that,
Yeah,
like, what were you saying?
powerful people do exist, and that is one of the very hard problems of social organization. Steve Jobs was famously said to have a reality distortion field, such that he would make you buy into his vision. And Jobs very famously did not have exclusively good ideas, and
Mhm.
might effectively have actually killed himself. His pancreatic issues may have been engaged with various decisions that he made about his own health and lifestyle. I know I saw something that Ashton Kutcher, who played Jobs in one of his biopics, as part of preparation, decided to go into his diet, and I believe had to be hospitalized because he very nearly destroyed his pancreas eating what Steve Jobs ate. So, you know,
Wow.
uh,
Mhm. Well, if I can
charismatic
jump in,
people,
go ahead.
yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, charismatic
Sure.
people might appear to be correct about things, but that might not actually be the case.
Mhm.
Phyllis, you were saying?
Well, I mean, everything that you're talking about the monkeys, I can see through a lens of psychology, which obviously it's behavioral modification in an extreme, but sort of aligning that with free will and just kind of looking at the whole picture, like when you said, see, I don't think right now, I don't know if it's a question of free will. I think it's a question of our survival and the quality of our survival. And option A and option B are, do we want to make it? Do we want our children to inherit an earth where they're safe, where they're cared for, where they're welcomed, where what they have to offer is valued? Or do we want our children to inherit an earth that might be blowing up in their face or is physically uninhabitable, or they're living the planet is basically taken over by the powerful, with the military behind them? Or do you know what I mean? So, like, I mean, I think we really are facing, like, it's a survival issue now. And I know I sound kind of dire, but if we look at what happens to people who don't get the basics of what they need, or let me phrase it from the positive. We all really need love and connection. It's known that we're wired for love and connection. And when people don't get it, it's like feeding them bad food, like whatever Steve Jobs ate that destroyed his pancreas. We can't keep feeding the human population bad emotional, psychological, mental, and physical food and expect to produce a world that any of us would want to live in, let alone our future generations. And so, you know, when you're talking about the electricity in the cage, it's like, that's what we've done. You know, that's what we're doing to each other. We're training each other that we can't go for the good food, that the people who go for the good food are going to get hurt. So that's how I see the correlation between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about and what I feel concerned about. And, you know, and that being said, let me just say on the other side, people are wonderful. You know, there are wonderful, wonderful people all around us. One of the things that I looked up when I was doing some of the research for my book was, or the things that I came across actually, was the amount of volunteerism in America alone is extraordinary. It's a huge percentage of the population that give their time and their energy to help others for no monetary return. And there are people everywhere who are, you know, volunteer in prisons and take food for the homeless and teach inner city people how to grow food on their rooftops. And I think that's the food we want to feed each other. We want to like have that in our news. We want those to be the role models. So we're not electrifying the ones who go for the banana.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You go
I
for it.
would, yes, I would concur with a lot of that. I don't think you're being sort of overly dire at all. Um, my kind of only tiny nitpick of contention is that I don't think that we need to extend any concern at all. A world that is sort of being ruled by its present leaders, because the systems that undergird their existing leadership are crumbling, and so their failure is effectively guaranteed.
I hope you're right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just math. Like
Okay.
the markets
Okay.
and governments and communication that we use to operate our businesses, militaries, educational systems, everything, are effectively being overwhelmed by the information torrent that is generated by
Mm-hmm.
just cell phones alone. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's a lot more out
Mm-hmm.
there than just that. Uh, and so the task, and it's a big task that is before us, is generating systems that can function.
Right.
And if people that are sort of currently socially or politically or economically successful want to support or join those systems, I don't think that you necessarily have to slam the door in their face. But
Right.
you neither they nor we can survive with the ones that exist today, because those have no future.
Right. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Just a quick sidebar on Phyllis, what you were saying before. I heard a joke once that there's three types of people. There are people who are in therapy, there are people who went to therapy, and there are people who need therapy.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, and I think it really illustrates exactly your point that you know everybody needs love and connection,
Mm-hmm.
and
I mean, I've worked with hundreds of people over the years. I've been a therapist for over 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of people. I have never worked with one person, nor do I know anyone in my personal life who doesn't want love and connection, safety, peace, creativity, personal fulfillment, and a future for their children if they have children. I've never met anybody. People don't come to therapy and work on themselves, reflect on, what formed the blocks that they're suffering from, or the pain that they feel, or the anxiety or the depression or whatever it is that they're suffering from, and want more violence in their life. So there's this massive disconnect between what we all want for ourselves and the people we love and care about, and what we allow and condone in the world. And that to me is a mental health issue. It's a psychological issue that we have been told is a political ideological issue, and it's not. There's an incredible psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist named Bandy Lee, who I heard on a talk on the radio. And one of the things that she said was like, "Okay, you're my people." She said, "Fascism is not a political movement; it's a mental illness," and that's how I see it. And that's what I think we need to know.
Wow. Fascinating. And that ties in beautifully with your whole,
Totally.
Theory. Fascinating. Noah, let's move into the final segment. And why don't you tell us a present thing, some sort of anecdote, anything that's going on related to you or your work or the mathematical world at large, or any sort of piece of, anecdotal news that's going on now.
Well, one of the big things I'm doing these days is fighting with the patent office, which is pretty much straight out of like Joseph Heller at this point.
Dude,
Um,
I feel you. I feel you. I just filed a patent and they send me a very nasty email in response.
okay, well, from my experience, sort of the way you're sort of supposed to do the two-step is that you file a patent that has sort of massive overclaims, but has some patentable claim material. And then they say, okay, this is the claimable material, but these massive overclaims aren't going to fly. And so you essentially make the massive overclaims a subordinate clause of the claim material, and then it's fair sailing. I did break out of the dance a little bit because there's a few integral equations that describe certain aspects of the patent, and I made it very clear to my attorneys that those were essentially for instances. They were not the substance of the patent. They sort of are demonstrations of existing things within the space of what I was intending to patent. And the patent office essentially attempted in the first place to restrict down to just them, which would have been too tight a restriction. But late, I got a notice of acceptance, which was then withdrawn by the patent office. And then that withdrawal didn't actually take place through the ordinary channels, and they objected that the patent was actually on unpatentable material because it did not represent any advance in the state of the art. So it took about a year, but in February of last year, I was able to put together a brief that had papers from the 1980s that are actually hosted at the Bureau of Standards and Technology on how the system I did actually improves on things. And they granted me a notice of acceptance, which they then re-withdrew 3 weeks later in what might
Oh my
be
goodness.
the first time in U.S. history. I've spoken to numerous patent attorneys and numerous people who work with and have received multiple patents. Nobody's ever even heard of a double withdrawal. The claim for the second withdrawal is that it would be unpatentable material because they would be granting the exclusive access to economic activity. But they also grant that there is no prior art of any kind for my patent application. So the entire existing economy would be exempt from this patent. So the claim that I would own exclusive access to economic activity would require the economy not to actually exist right now, which is a difficult thing to support logically.
Just a small little clause that, you know.
Yes. So we've filed an appeal. I have been assured that the appeal will not be heard before September of this year. I don't know when it will be heard, but it definitely won't be heard before September of this year. Uh, and uh, and I'm now occasionally funding my attorneys having conversations with the patent office, which is the thing I need to be looking into a little bit further to find out what's going on. And yeah, we'll see where things go. The examiner and the examiner supervisor has acknowledged that there is no prior art. They could not make a case for any existing patent or patent application to be concerning overlapping material with what I'm claiming, and they have conceded that this system is superior to the market mechanisms that presently exist and are known to be possible to exist. But no patent is forthcoming.
You gotta love bureaucracy. Oh my God.
I think both Phyllis and I would point out that you absolutely don't have to love them, and
I was
that's
joking.
not
I was being
not how the
facetious.
cycle of abuse is broken.
Oh my. Wow. So Phyllis, how about you? Something that's been going on.
Well, I guess I will just talk about, really the book that I'm writing, because that's what's going on for me. And I think that's where I think we're headed in a direction. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't read a lot of news, but I sort of skim the headlines a lot. And there is a lot about mental health. I don't think a lot of the articles are particularly good. The ones that I have delved into, I think some of them seem very superficial, or I just don't agree with what they're saying. But it is in the news, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy that people are talking about mental health, and I think that so I feel really great about writing my book at this time. And I guess the thing that I'm really present to, that I don't have any scientific data to support, but it's more anecdotal or more my own experience and some experiences that I see with clients and definitely with the friends and people that I know well. And that is that I think we're actually moving beyond psychology. I think psychology is pivotal. I think we have to be mentally healthy. We have to treat one another safely, with love, with valuing, with good limits and boundaries, with peaceful conflict resolution skills, all those things that I think really good psychology helps people develop in their own lives and in their relationships or their businesses. But I really think we're moving to a different consciousness. And I see this happening for people. And it's still marginalized as, people are odd, or it's random experiences, or there's no way to prove it. But I think that's what's happening. I think people are moving, that mental health is the foundation for the next phase of human evolution in terms of our consciousness and where it's going, in terms of, if you want to take it from a very, basic level and then expand it out, the way I would say it is, we understand from family therapy the relationship as never before of the part to the whole and the whole to the part. And we're seeing that systemically in our societies and in our world and in our businesses. And Noah, I'm sure you can say a lot more about that. And I think that we are parts of consciousness, and there's a whole consciousness around us. And I think the human brain and the human heart and our capacities are moving to tap into to that level of consciousness where the relationship of the part to the whole is an experience. It's not just a theory, but it's an experience that brings a real connection to a consciousness that's beyond what we typically think of as you know, as far as humans have come. I don't think there's a lid on where human consciousness can go if we make it, if we're still here.
Right.
So,
So on a similar note, but just to bring the ball back into Noah's court a little bit, Noah, are you familiar with the video game Minecraft?
I am, yes.
Okay, so did you read that it was within the last several months that somebody was able to create a functioning computer inside of Minecraft?
That's actually neither surprising nor challenging. It turns
Really?
out that, yeah, it turns out that that's effectively what Turing's trick was. So what Turing did was demonstrate that everything that is so-called Turing complete um, is capable of simulating full computation. And what we have discovered in the last, well, actually, we discovered it pretty quickly after he sort of pointed the way towards this thing. But we discovered over the last, say, 50 years is that Turing complete complexity is actually vastly simpler than anyone could conceivably suppose. If you're familiar with Stephen Wolfram of Wolfram Alpha.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm familiar with
Okay.
Wolfram Alpha. Yeah.
So yeah, Stephen was a wonderkind. He's one of the smartest people on earth, and he's been doing exploratory computation on computational systems called cellular automata for the last 30 or 40 years now. And he actually discovered, I believe it's rule 126. I don't remember which rule it was off the top of my head, but essentially, what this boils down to is a 6-bit Turing complete system. So within 6 yes/no questions, it is possible to have a thing that, if replicated across an arbitrarily long line, can achieve arbitrary computations. And he discovered it and
Meaning
then sort of put a
six,
bounty on the proof. Oh,
just a quick question.
sure.
Just a quick question. So you mean six binary pieces of information can determine anything?
6 binary pieces of information can determine a system which can replicate anything imaginable.
My mind is blown right now.
And to put this in somewhat of context, the sort of free randomness in our entire observable universe is 300 bits. So there is enough space in our universe to completely specify 50 systems that would be capable of being universe simulators, and we would never be able to tell the difference.
Oh my god! See, I was just like going a little bit, in that direction. Like, ooh, if they can build a computer in Minecraft, then what does that say about? But whoa, that's just
Yeah, there's a thing a guy named Stephen Claney came up with called the Church-Turing thesis, which is named after Alan Turing, who's become relatively famous these days, and Alonzo
right.
Church, who developed a different and actually more convenient computational system, and was like Turing's thesis advisor and also Claney's thesis advisor, and did a lot of work around with a lot of the early pioneers in general computation. And the Church-Turing thesis is that all computational systems can achieve everything that all computational systems can achieve, more or less. The Church-Turing theorem cannot be proved, or has not been proved to date. I did do a little work showing that you could axiomatize it. So if you disinclude from all of computation incomputable objects, then all transfinities collapse, but you maintain their topological characters, and every existing constructive and and conditionally non-constructive proofs all maintain their existing character, because everything that you can compute would remain computable, definitionally. But yeah, it's like I said, this is the mathematics of philosophy. It's surprising. It invalidates most of the philosophy that we have actually done over the last
Right.
6,000 years. Because it turns out that our imagination does have limits, and we can't imagine what those limits are, because imagining what the limits are is one of the things that we can't imagine.
That's what I'm trying to understand. So you're essentially saying that a set of infinite sets is equivalent to a set to an infinite set of real numbers?
No. So
Explain to me. I'm trying to figure out. I'm still trying to figure out what you're saying.
So it's well known that the cardinality of the reals, that is the number of objects in the set of real numbers, is different from the cardinality of the integers. However, the difference between those two cardinalities are the incomputable numbers. So the numbers that exist in the reals that you can't match up to the integers are numbers that you can't imagine.
Okay, so this is essentially, are you familiar with the hotel with infinite rooms?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it essentially?
So I've
Phyllis,
done.
are you familiar with that?
No.
So
I'm having a hard time following you, but that's fine.
Very quickly. So imagine a set of a room that has an infinite number of rooms in it, and somebody shows up. Every room is full. Somebody shows up. You show up and are like, "I'd like a room." So the bellhop just says, "Oh, okay." They do an announcement and say, "Everybody go into one room up from your own, one number up." And now the first room's open, and I can give it to you. And then right behind you, a bus with an infinite number of people comes in and says, "We'd like rooms." And it's like, "Oh, okay." Announcement goes out, "Everybody go into the room that's double your room number." And then hand out the odd number of rooms keys. So infinity has this kind of weird self, mapping function. It turns out that you can keep going past infinity, that there are what are known as ordinals, that is numbers of order, where you can sensibly talk about numbers like infinity plus one, or a couple of infinities, or an infinity squared. It turns out that all of those numbers are the same cardinality as just plain old infinite number of hotel rooms. But you can get yourself up to imagine an infinite hotel room with like an infinite set of coordinates of infinite rooms.
Right. So like infinity by infinity by infinity.
Infinity to the infinity, basically.
Right, but not just to the infinity. It would be infinity to the infinity to the infinity.
Well, that comes in later. Yes, that would actually have a qualitatively different size of number of rooms, and there's a sequence of these cardinalities and infinities, and there's this whole thing attached to them. The thing is, the members of this sequence that are beyond our matching capacity to sort of plain old numbers infinity are all incomputable.
Okay, I need to rewatch this and think about it. My brain is hurting a little bit. So shifting gears yet again, one last time, because I think that we're at roughly the end of our session. Phyllis, so total out of left field, right? This is going to be totally out of left field. But I personally I'm not sure what the word is. I guess sexually abused. I'm not sure how exactly to describe it because I'm not familiar with like the exact definitions of the difference between molestation and sexual abuse and whatever, all these different terminologies. But I guess just to like put a face to a problem, what would you say to somebody who has, gone through similar ordeals?
Mhm. Well, I would look at what's troubling them in the present, because any dysfunction or trauma that happens to a person, can have a multitude of results. That's definitely not the same for every person. And like I said, there's sort of patterns we see, but that's as good as it gets. Each person is an individual. So I would start with like, where is life not working? Is there a place where life not working? Is it in your sexuality? Is it in relationship? Is it in feelings of self-worth or body image or body issues? And so you kind of start with where the problem is. You don't start any place where there's not a problem. So that would be the beginning. And then you kind of delve into, usually what happens in a therapy process is, this is kind of what you're asking for, is so let's just say, you don't have to say what it is for you, but if someone, unless you want to, but if someone says, I'm really having trouble with my body image, I just feel like I'm fat all the time.
I was going to say, like, okay, let's pick some universal ones. Like,
Okay.
Body image. Everybody has body image issues.
Yeah. And so let's just say that's what really troubles a person, and they won't wear any revealing clothes. They have a really hard time getting in relationship because they don't want anybody to see their body. All the things that or they have an eating disorder or whatever, mushrooms out from the violation of their body or the misuse of their body, and then you look at, one of the first questions you might ask someone is, so they'll describe, this is what happened. I went on a date and something happened and I withdrew. All of a sudden I thought the person thought I looked fat and I just, shut down and went home. And then a leading question might be, when was the first time you felt, what did that feel like? And what was the first time you felt that way? And that immediately the person is like, in the feeling, in the body of what happened, if they're, and then they're like, I'm 3, and this is what happened when I was 3. And then there's all different ways therapeutically that you look at and reprocess what happened to the person. And again, this is all, it's not an exact science. It's very, very personal, very particular. It could be a really quick emergence from the trauma. It could take a long time. And there's many different processes that we've learned about how to reprocess. But what you're reprocessing is, in a nutshell, and I would say this is true for the individual, this is true for our country. What are the beliefs I took on about myself as a result of what happened? And you particularly target the negative beliefs. I'm ugly, I'm fat, no one will ever love me, I'm worthless. Those are typical negative beliefs that people come up with. And then through different processes of therapy, of reworking the trauma, because those beliefs aren't true. No one's born unlovable, but because of what happened to us, we believe those things. And so the process of therapy is loosening the hold of those negative beliefs and helping us incorporate and feel positive beliefs about ourselves that are going to change the ways we cope, the ways we relate to ourselves and to other people. That's a really quick nutshell, but does that help answer your question?
I would say it begins to, and
yeah,
it's an ongoing conversation that has to continually be had.
Absolutely. That's why I say that's the beginning.
Right.
That's the beginning. And so, and I would just say, in answer to, I don't know what happened to you, and you don't have to say, but you don't have to struggle over the definition. If someone vibed you in a sexual way and you felt it and it made you uncomfortable, that's a form of abuse. If they penetrated your body, it's a form of abuse. If they showed you pornography, it's a form of abuse. All the way to, rape or extreme violation. But there's, and one of the things that I learned in a lot of the studying I did in graduate school is that sometimes one incident can change a person's life. It doesn't have to be that it was a repeated thing or that it was, or that you felt like you were going to die. There's something about that kind of violation of a person's body and being used as an object that damages our sense of self. And that doesn't mean that there aren't people who go on their merry way, but I would say the majority of people don't go on their merry way. Do you want to say anything else about why you think it's an ongoing conversation?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You said it's an ongoing conversation. I just wondered if there was anything more you wanted to say about that.
Oh, I guess in, kind of an auxiliary of what you were saying, like I have OCD. So I find that we'll have these, or I don't, you saw what I just did there, by the way. Yeah. I depersonalized it by saying we, or one, whatever. But no, I will have intrusive thoughts, and I find that the following analogy was very helpful for me. Thoughts are like cars driving by on a street, and we, the observer, are sitting on a bench on the side of the road. Obsessive thoughts are chasing after the cars. Mm-hmm. But it's simply a matter of just sitting back down and allowing the thoughts to move on by. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's a very powerful recognition for somebody to have. That it's interesting. I was discussing this with a friend recently. He said, do we think thoughts or do thoughts happen? I don't know. I'm curious. What are both of your takes? So and then we'll end with this. What's your take on that? Do we think thoughts or do thoughts happen to us? Noah?
Well, I would see these things essentially as computational processes, at which point it would probably be in the category of things that we couldn't answer that question. The core of computability is actually incomputability, and a computational process that is ongoing will either arrive at a particular desired destination or it won't. It turns out that the arrival of such systems at destinations is precisely analogous to the solution of some Diophantine equation. And it turns out that you can't actually tell through observation whether or not such a system will eventually arrive at the desired outcome or not, unless it already has arrived at that outcome and it's done now. So
you're saying it can already be determined post facto.
Right.
And it's already
anyone in process may eventually arrive at the destination that you believe it's heading towards, but it doesn't have to, and literally no thing that you can do will be capable of, in general, deciding between which of those two things are occurring. So the question of where we stand, it certainly feels as if we can initiate some thoughts, and also certainly if some thoughts occur. I don't know that we have the conceptual machinery to distinguish those things, and the conceptual machinery we do have makes me extremely pessimistic that we could find a way to distinguish those two facts of our universe, basically.
Hmm.
Whoa, I need to think about that. Phyllis?
Well, I don't know the answer to your question. I think there are so many variables, and I think different people have different experiences. And if I speak from my own experience, I would say that I think thoughts, just arise a lot. They just seem to arise randomly from experience or association, or something triggered them. And there are times when I'm really focusing my brain, and I feel like, I'm thinking, and there's an active process going on that I'm actually engaged in. It's not random or haphazard. Um, and then there are times when it feels like uh, thoughts really come from somewhere, like I've tapped into something. Whether that's really true, in some verifiable way, I don't know. Um, but there's just different qualities and vibrations, I would say, even attached to certain kinds of thoughts. And that's part of, in my experience, I have had, and I know many people have had, what feels like, you know, tapping into a different level of thought. And that's what gives me hope that the human race is evolving, or can evolve anyway, whether we do or not, can evolve to a consciousness that that what we think becomes, synonymous with participation in the survival and the good and the evolution of the whole. So that does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that's what I want, and that's what I'm rooting for, and that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. So I'll tell you from the other side if I can.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This has been such a pleasure. Any final thoughts, or something that you just wanted to say before but didn't get a chance to before we wrap things
Well,
up?
so one thing it occurred to me is when we were talking about these trans infinities, and that does all sound quite sort of insane and theoretical. But as it happens, there was a candidate piece of prior art that was a multi-hundred-page thesis that claimed effectively every kind of parimutuel system that the writers of that patent could imagine. And they specifically, in one sentence, uh, go on to claim every system with a countably infinite, and that's that sort of first infinity you were talking about, set of betting pools. Um, so they listed a bunch of different types, and then they said everything that anybody could ever list that has up to an infinite number of objects in it, we get all those too. And that was granted. Like they got that. As it happens, my patent, while it has a feature that is parimutuel-ish, and that word appears in my patent, which is probably why the guy kicked up the prior art for it. I'm dealing with a space that belongs to one of those transfinite sets. And so their patent actually specifically closed the door a few infinities before my patent's actually talking about. And as a result of that single sentence and basically simple mathematical fact, my patent didn't have to cope with their patent in any way.
All right. All right.
So,
Thank you guys so much. What were you saying?
oh yeah, it was just, it is an odd and crazy property of mathematics that these things that seem sort of mind-bendingly weird turn out to have immediately practical consequences in our day-to-day
Yeah.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
All
I
right.
just want to thank you so much for having me on your show. And Noah, very, very fascinating to hear you talk a language that I don't speak, and you know, and just to experience you with a mind that is so completely different from mine. And it just gives me such a great appreciation for, you know, our diversity, and we each have something so different to contribute. All our talents are completely different, and our gifts are different, and we need all of us. We need you, Ellie, and thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys so much. This has been such a pleasure. And it's just really cool just to see the interaction between the soft sciences and the hard sciences, and, you know, and the three of us just going at it. So it's really been a pleasure. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank
All
you.
right.